11. Interlinking of river waters is a complex process influenced by center-state coordination and technical sign-offs. Comment. Interlinking of rivers aims to transfer the water from water surplus basin to water deficit basin, thereby catering for water shortages. The National Perspective Plan (NPP) drafted in 1980 aimed to connect Himalayan rivers with peninsular rivers. Under the NPP, the National Water Development Agency (NWDA) has identified 30 links, 16 under peninsular component and 14 under Himalayan component. This initiative is expected to end farmers' dependence on monsoon, bring millions of hectares of cultivable land under irrigation, and generate huge megawatts of electricity in addition to curtailing floods in the surplus basin. However, the success of these projects depends heavily on the effective coordination and cooperation between the center and states, as well as the states among themselves. 1. The subject of water remains primarily a state subject, i.e. List 2 of the 7th Schedule. Therefore, there is a need for an amendment to bring water into the concurrent list, i.e. List 3 of the 7th Schedule. 2. Institutional framework for interstate water disputes must be strengthened in order to avoid long arbitrations, since in future, the upper riparian states may not be unwilling to share a proportionate amount of water with the lower riparian states, especially during the dry months, owing to increased demand for water in its own state. X. Mahanadi water dispute between Chhattisgarh and Odisha. 3. Proper rehabilitation of people affected by the interlinking projects must be undertaken to ensure justice and also to ensure people's support to future projects. For environmental issues, too must be considered to avoid the adverse effects of environmental degradation and climate change. In addition to these, there are also technical glitches that have to be taken into account while proceeding with river interlinking. 1. Data deficiency. Addition to these 30 HT are also technical glitches CEC that have to be taken into account while WHW hosting with river interlinking. There is dearth of data related to hydrological sector. We need to have data related to water availability in different seasons and water demand across the sectors for a particular region. This will aid in devising the water sharing formula between different states and avoiding the disputes as we see in case of Kahari. 2. Economic feasibility and land acquisition. Some economists question the economic feasibility of the project given the need for prime pumping required to transfer the water from Himalayan rivers to peninsular rivers. In addition to it, there is question of land acquisition and forest submergence. 3. Environmental conundrum. Diversion of west-flowing rivers of western Ghats would affect biodiversity of the Sakai Edrates, which is also a hotspot. Construction work in biodiversity hotspots would further create environmental and social crises. Water ecosystem may be damaged with river diversion. For international cooperation, rivers like the Ganga, Computer, and Teesta are international rivers, and projects on them might raise diplomatic issues with the neighbors. 5. Geological. There is fear of seismology of region being affected by the reservoirs. In addition, there is possibility of alteration in the river flow and sediment load in the lower stream. The above questions needs to addressed before embarking on this mammoth project with long gestation period of about 50 years. Simultaneously, focus can be given on more crops, less drought mission, watershed management managerial scheme, which are good viable alternatives. 12. Bank recapitalization plan is a necessary but not sufficient condition for reviving growth. It must be accompanied by structural changes. Discuss. Recapitalization means readjustment of banks' capital structure by issuing of bonds, budgeted amount to bail out, etc. The need for recapitalization arises due to 1. Staggering NPA. First, public sector banks have experienced a steady deterioration in the quality of assets. The Reserve Bank of India (RBI) noted in its annual report for 2016-17 that as of end March 2017, 12.1% of the advances of the banking system were stressed. The resultant exuberance in lending to infrastructure projects via the public-private partnership PPP model, coupled with governance issues in select public sector banks and associated reports of crony capitalism, added to this baggage with non-performing assets. 2. Low credit growth. Private partnership PPP model, coupled with governance issues in select public sector banks and associated reports of EEDR of crony NYN capitalism, added to this baggage with non-performing FOF assets. www.freeuxmaterials.org. India is predominantly a bank finance-led economy, so when bank lending slows down, it surely impacts future growth. Bank credit growth has been at nearly a 60-year low. Bank credit growth since 2014 to 15 has decelerated drastically and stood as low as 0.2% during 2016 to 17. The recapitalization is expected to give much needed fuel to the public sector banks, and it may lead to credit growth which is very low from few years. Industries can avail bank loans so that they can invest in new projects. Now banks can write off some portion of the loan so that stalled projects can rejuvenate. Due to all this reason, growth will occur. But closer scrutiny of the economy reveals for the need of other structural reforms in addition to recapitalization, as it's not the credit availability but also the demand for credit availability that has affected the growth in recent years. These structural reforms has to be in both banking sector and economy as whole. Banking structural reforms. 1. Governance reform, granting genuine autonomy to banks in their functioning, including all aspects such as lending, recovery, and recruitment decisions. It will lead to better accountability and quicker decisions. 2. There has to be a contingency plan and also the compulsory risk assessment before lending. This will result in better credit flow. 3. Insolvency provision, early detection of stress asset, better implementation of recovery and stringent application of insolvency and bankruptcy code should be done. These measures will enable the banks to better cater for the needs of growth in the economy, as the health of banking system is crucial for the revival of growth. Economy-wide structural issues. 1. Infrastructure projects can be funded through long-term bonds for developmental organizations like the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank, or the IDB in its original avatar, as they have long gestation and long payback period. This will reduce the stress on the banks. 2. Judicial reforms. The second reason for deterioration of loans could be the impact of key judicial decisions like abrupt cancellations of coal mines and spectrum allocation. When the same were reallocated through expensive auctions, it proved to be a fatal burden on respective business models of power, steel and telecom. 3. Land acquisitions and environmental clearances have to be obtained at the earliest in order to avoid delay and the cost escalation. In addition, we can also adopt the three-pronged strategy suggested by the IMF in its regional economic outlook, addressing the corporate weaknesses, continued fiscal consolidation through revenue measures, and improving the efficiency of labor and product markets.